After years of grinding, every skill maxed, every quest complete, I did what anyone else would do. Start an Iron Man. The Iron Man journey is ongoing, and quite frankly, never ending. But that account has reached horizons this one never did. At that point, is this account really a main? This isn't a fresh start, this is a comeback story. Welcome to Main Character Energy. The time is finally here. Our Radiant Oplate grind officially begins now. When we bonded up the main account again, this was our ultimate goal, but we had some stepping stones along the way. We had a checklist and we managed to check just about everything off. With the great fortunes from the back-to-back sives, we didn't end up going to chambers after all, so unfortunately still no twisted kits on the account. But nevertheless, we move forward. Let's break down what is required to acquire Radiant Oplate. First things first, obviously, you need the armor itself, the regular Oplate armor. We were fortunate enough to pull the legs and the top ourselves, although we did have to split with our duo partner, so we essentially got it for 50% off in a sense. We do need the helmet though. Secondly, once you have the Oplate armor, you do need to complete 5 different Yama contracts. Each contract is its own unique spin on top of just being a buffed variant of the base level boss. And these contracts are solo. That is another key difference there as well. For each contract we complete, we will obtain a part of the Purifying Sigil. With the sigil and 2,500 Aether runes per piece of armor, totaling to 7,500, we can then convert our regular Oplate into its Radiant version. 4 of the 5 contracts, we will be utilizing magic, and I know for one particular one, it's going to require Crush weapons. I don't really have a game plan going into this. I heard that Forfeit Breath was the easiest contract, and Bloodied Blows and Sensory Clouding were among the more difficult ones. I think I'm going to start with Divine Severance. I don't know where this falls in terms of difficulty, but it's probably not the easiest or the hardest. One final note before we get started on the contracts. I just want to reiterate that I'm going to acquire Radiant Oplate twice in succession here. Once I get a contract completion on the main account, I will then try to complete it on my Iron Man. I have the luxury of my Iron Man being ready for this grind just as my main is. Whereas back with the Blorva grind, I essentially had to relearn the Awakened bosses when my Iron Man was finally in position to go for it. Let's take a look at the contract terms for Divine Severance. Some of the restraints on Yama strength will be removed. Yama deactivates protection prayers on sight. Yama no longer penetrates prayers. Yama spawns void flares continuously. Void flare explosions are lethal. The challenger must be alone, and if we succeed, we will receive 1 Purifying Sigil right. Let's take a look at our gear and inventory setup here for Divine Severance. We're decked out in our Max Mage setup here, along with the Purging Staff. We're going to be auto-casting Dark Demon Bane here, and as always, whenever you're on the spellbook, you do want to cast Mark of Darkness. You want to use Thralls, and we're going to be utilizing Death Charge and Ward of Arceus as well. In our inventory here, we have the Saradomin Godsword as a melee weapon. That's just going to be used to damage the Judge of Yama. And we can also spec it to get some health and prayer back in a pinch. We also have the Eye of Ayak here. This is just going to be for magic reduction. We're only using the Eye of Ayak for its special attack. I'm not sure how long the encounter is going to be, so we're going to be bringing in the Saturated Heart. We have our Surge Potion just to get spec back if we need to. Sandfew, I'm pretty sure Yama does poison you, so we can either choose to pre-pot an anti-venom, but we can also just bring a Sandfew serum in as well because it serves both as prayer restore, stat restore, and anti-venom. We got restores and then just anglers and Karam ones, a little bit of combo eats just in case things really hit the fan. And yes, on the main account, I unfortunately do not have Lumbridge Elite done, or more specifically, I don't have Lumby Hard done because I never went to Mage Training Arena on this account. So in order to get there, we are going to be using the Drahman Staff. And no, I don't feel like shelling out the extra GP for the teleport scrolls. Full disclosure if you couldn't tell, but this is now post-commentary as we run through the footage of my Divine Severance run. I'll be disclosing the number of attempts it took me at the end of this contract, as well as the end of the video as we compare each contract to another. Full unedited VODs of each contract will also be uploaded separately and linked in the description. Let's talk about Divine Severance and what makes this contract challenging, for me personally and just in general. First things first, you can't camp your overhead prayers. They will automatically be turned off after 2 ticks. As such, you have to time your hits with Yama's Snap, Mage, and range auto attacks. This is mostly a non-issue in the first 2 phases of the encounter, as things are pretty chill there, but amidst the chaos during phase 3, it can occasionally catch you out. On the flip side though, when you do pray against them correctly, you take absolutely 0 damage. There is no chip damage in this contract. I will say, all the difficulty lies in phase 3, where you are dodging the waves, which aren't the same as regular Yama by the way. The waves will occasionally be off-center, forcing you to have to dodge with an L movement. It's just another added level of chaos while trying to DPS the boss, deal with void flares, and just avoid damage all around. With this contract, I managed to get my first completion after using 132 contracts. I chose to track contracts instead of deaths, which would have been added effort to account for, as sometimes I managed to teleport out to save myself from the death fees. In hindsight, I don't think this contract warranted 132 contracts for 2 reasons. I have very little solo Yama experience, so I really had to start from scratch. The second reason, I have a bad habit of what I call doom sending. This is where I keep spamming attempts even where I might be better off taking a break due to fatigue or even tilt. Or even to simply analyze my mistakes and continue learning the fight. Basically, of these 132 contracts, the majority were used on day 1, and after a good night's rest, I was able to get it relatively quickly on day number 2. One down, 4 more to go. After I got my first completion, I went ahead and did a second completion on the main before moving on to the Iron Man, just to ensure to myself that I understood how to tackle this contract. And well, I was given a little extra reward for that. What the? Okay, I'll take it. It's just that easy. While I did die once in between the first clear and the second, it gave me the confidence boost to send it on the Iron Man. That confidence was well founded as I managed to one and done it there. First try on the Iron, let's go. We only had 3 Divine Severance contracts on this account too. Whew. Alright. Let's take a look at the contract terms for Bloodied Blows. Some of the restraints on Yama's strength will be removed. Void Flares are spawned in higher quantities. Void Flares are more resistant to attacks. Both Yama and Challenger gain Wretched Strength. Challenger must be alone, and if we succeed, we will get 1 Purifying Sigil middle. It's time to talk about the gear and inventory setup for the Bloodied Blows contract. Now before we really get into it, I do have to mention the Wretched Strength mechanic once again, as it does play a factor in our choices in our inventory. Basically, if you don't know what Wretched Strength is, think of Darok, where the lower your health is, the higher your max hit is. But yeah, let's get into it. Our actual gear here is actually exactly the same as we geared up in Divine Severance, Max Mage with the Purging Staff. However, this time around in our inventory, we do have the Tunic and Shadow. For this contract, I feel confident enough to DPS with the Shadow on Phase 1 and Phase 2. I'm not exactly sure on the numbers. I do think the Shadow is slightly better, but I could be mistaken. Nevertheless, I will be bringing the Shadow in, at least for Phase 1 and Phase 2. Now, I mentioned this because the Purging Staff is still used to deal with the Void Flares. So on Phase 3, when things get hectic, I'm just going to be simply camping the Purging Staff. We bring in the Garazi Rapier as a melee weapon just to deal with the judge. I don't think we're going to be SGS specking here, as we actually don't really want to heal up for this fight. And again, Eye of Ayak for mage defense reduction. Rest of the inventory is mostly the same as Divine Severance, where we have Anglers and Karambwans, our restores, Surge Potion, Saturated Heart, and whatnot. However, the key difference here is the Locator Orb and the Guthix Rest I have. Again, the Wretched Strength mechanic, we're going to be purposefully sitting low HP. In fact, on P1 and P2, we're pretty much going to camp at 1 health because we're going to ideally take 0 damage. And then in P3, we do have to find a balance because we will be taking chip damage from the magic and range auto attacks. Unlike Divine Severance, where there's no chip damage, there is chip damage on this one. So yeah, this one's really about teetering on the line between life and death. So the Guthix Rests are going to come in handy for that. Let's talk about what made Bloodied Blows difficult for me. I think this one is obvious. You put yourself at low health, even all the way down to 1 to maximize your DPS. At any given time, you are just 1 mistake from failing, and that is a lot of pressure. With this contract, at first I died quite a bit on phase 1 and phase 2. Instances like the red glyph meteor special along with shadow waves occurring at the same time could be pretty tricky to deal with. I eventually learned how to deal with this through trial and error, and eventually I got past the hurdle of the first 2 phases, and it was just phase 3 left to deal with. Again, phase 3 is where they throw everything at you. You can't sit at 1 HP to maximize damage, as snap attacks now do chip damage to you. You can't sit at too high of a health threshold, otherwise you won't be able to deal with the Void Flares. So throughout the fight, I'm constantly sipping Guthix Rest, maybe even eating an Angler in emergency situations, and then adjusting my health with the Locator Orb. Bloodied Blows took me exactly 100 contracts to get my first completion. I would say that this contract took me more attempts than expected due to carelessness in the first 2 phases, as again, 1 mistake means failure, and when it came time to phase 3, honestly, it was a lot of nervousness and succumbing to the pressure. Once I became confident in the phase 3 cycle, I was able to stay patient and ultimately get my first clear. Yes! Woo! Alright. Contract of Bloodied Blows, Purifying Sigil, middle. Just as I did with Divine Severance, I went ahead and did a second Bloodied Blows KC on the main before moving onto the Iron. With this second KC, it really confirmed to me personally that I knew how to handle the P3 cycle. There we go, second Bloodied Blows completion just like that. That was easy. Okay. On to the Iron Man. Onto the Iron Man. Unfortunately, I didn't one and done this one, and I think failing the first one just shook my confidence ever so slightly as I began thinking about my limited number of contracts on the Iron Man. As such, I failed a few more times, but I eventually regained confidence and steadiness and cleared it in 6 contracts. Woo! There we go, 2 out of 5 on both accounts. Bloodied Blows complete, let's go! For the contract of sensory clouding, let's take a look at the contract terms. Some of the restraints on Yama's strength will be removed. Yama's attacks have increased prayer penetration. Yama can pursue forever. Void Flare explosions are lethal. Challenger has 50% reduced attack range. The Challenger must be alone, and if we succeed, we will receive Purifying Sigil left. Let's get into the gear and inventory setup for the Sensory Cloud contract. Now this one is also an immense amount of pressure, just like Bloodied Blows, although the pressure comes in a different form. This time around, we're not forced to sit at low HP or anything like that. Instead, Yama is forever chasing us, always running towards us, a non-stop pursuit. And well, how do we counteract that? We bring the Scorching Bow. Now, as for our gear, It's mostly the same max mage, although we do bring the light bearer now instead of the mage's ring, as we're going to need that spec energy to constantly use our scorching bow. And in our ammo slot, we have amethyst arrows for the scorching bow. The rest of the inventory and the gear remains the same, purging staff, and this time around we're just going to go back to camping the purging staff rather than bring the shadow. Honestly, bringing the shadow is always just a comfort thing, and in this situation, I just opted to use the purging staff exclusively. When I was doing research into this contract, I was honestly nervous right from the start, as Phase 1 and Phase 2 requires a step back method that hinges upon proper timing. Once I learned that you can time your step backs off of visual cues of the hit spots on your character, I had no issues with the first two phases, other than the odd mistakes here and there. As for Phase 3, I initially followed Red-Eyed Jedi's method to no avail. This is not to discredit him, as this was purely a skill issue on my end, where I just could not execute his strategy for whatever reason. I was stubborn though, and had good faith in his strategy as I followed his guides for the Blorva grind in the past, and even some of the other Yama contracts. Nevertheless, I never got his strategy to work for me, and I wasted an absolute ton of contracts. I then looked into Mulgo Kirby's sensory clouding P3 strategy, and his seemed a lot simpler to me. So far in the grind, each contract took me one solid day of learning, and then getting the job done on day number 2. I'd say I wasted the entire day 1 on a strategy that I didn't mesh with, and looked into Kirby's video late in the night. On day number 2, I learned Kirby's strategy, and got my first clear at a total of 132 contracts. Coincidentally, the same number of contracts it took for Divine Severance. I do get the feeling if I learned Kirby's strategy from the start, it would have taken much less attempts. Nevertheless, I went for the second KC to gain confidence before moving on to the Iron Man, just as I did in the previous 2 contracts. Switching over to the Iron Man, I got it done in 2 contracts. Honestly, not much to say about that, because once I learned Kirby's strategy, it seemed very simple to me, and I must have been overthinking it beforehand. Three out of 5 on both accounts. Here are the contract terms for Forfeit Breath. Some of the restraints on Yama's strength will be removed. Yama drains challenger stamina passively. Yama drains challenger stamina on dealing damage. Challenger loses upon reaching 0 stamina. The challenger must be alone. If we succeed, we will receive the Purifying Sigil top. Here's the gear and inventory setup for the Forfeit Breath contract. This one's interesting. It utilizes stamina as a resource, and if your stamina hits 0, well, you're just done for. That is the end of the run. Looking back at our gear here, we are switching back into the Mage's Ring and Radha's Blessing for prayer and max mage. We don't need any arrows or anything like that, so we store away the Scorching Bow that was used for sensory clouding. Here we have the Saradomin Godsword as our melee weapon for Yama. Actually, pretty much any of the contracts besides Bloodied Blows where we needed low health, we brought the Saradomin Godsword with us just to get extra stat restores with us. We do bring the Eye of Ayek for magic defense reduction, Saturated Heart as usual, and the rest of the inventory fills out the same as all of the other contracts, except we pack our inventory up with stamina potions, as stamina is going to be rapidly draining just by being in the fight, and if you take any damage, you also lose a good chunk of stamina. And once again, do not let your stamina hit 0, otherwise that is the end of the road. One of the Yama combat achievements is to do one of these Radiant Oplate contracts, and many people recommend doing Forfeit Breath as it's the easiest. Honestly, aside from the stamina stipulation, this contract is very much like a regular solo Yama KC. There are some odd extra waves here and there, but that's pretty much it. There's not too much to say about this one. I actually one and done it on the main account. I was so confident in this that I didn't go for a second KC before attempting it on the Iron Man. As for the Iron Man, Well, maybe I was arrogant, because I did fail a few times, funny enough. It ultimately took me 4 contracts to do it. I'm going to chalk it up to bad RNG though. Up to you to decide if that's just cope or not. Alright, 4 out of 5 on both accounts. Let's take a look at the contract terms for our 5th and final contract for Radiant Oplate. Contract of Glyphic Attenuation. Some of the restraints on Yama's strength will be removed. Glyphs protect you for less time and are more punishing. Yama is now weak to crush and nothing else. Challenger's prayer bonus affects their drain rate inversely. Challenger's prayer bonus increases the damage they deal. Challenger must be alone. And if we succeed, we will receive the Purifying Sigil bottom. Looking at the gear and inventory setup here for Glyphic Attenuation, we're looking drastically different than all previous encounters, as those were all mage encounters. This one, however, is melee. So while we do have the Purging Staff, that's pretty standard for dealing with Void Flares, we are going to be rocking the Elder Maw as our main hand weapon here. As for our armor, we have a mixed bag of prayer bonuses and just general melee gear. So we're wearing the Sunfire top and legs, and we got the Ring of the Gods, and then we have a Amulet of Blood Fury just for extra healing. Our inventory is absolutely packed with brews and restores. No hard food this time, as we're just going to be eating a lot. We're going to be taking a lot of damage, but we're also going to be doing a lot of damage. Now, Glyphic Attenuation was a frustrating one. I'll get into the details as to why, but I'm saying this now because I did flip-flop my inventory and gear quite a bit. I went from wearing my best available Crush, which I only have the Inquisitor's top. If I had the option, I would wear full Inquisitors, but I did try a combination of Torva and Inquisitors, as well as the Inquisitor's Mace, which I also do own. However, I didn't really find any success in that, so I switched back to the prayer gear, and I even tried slapping on even more prayer gear with the Ardy cape over the Inferno cape, the Sunfire helm as well. I tried varying combinations and just could not get the job done, but ultimately this setup is what worked for me for the main's completion. As I mentioned, this contract was incredibly frustrating. This is because I very quickly got the general gist of the contract and knew how to execute, but it felt like it came down to a lack of damage on my end while taking an absolute ton of unavoidable damage in return. Each attempt felt like it hinged upon whether my Elder Maw specs landed to have a smooth P1 and P2, setting me up with healthy supplies going into P3. The contract specifically states that high prayer means more damage, but it didn't specify how it affects accuracy, and I couldn't find any information regarding that. Once I did get into P3, admittedly I didn't learn the most efficient methods, and this being my 5th and final contract, I was impatient to learn the more optimal methods. Instead, I stumbled upon a very simple but slow method to do P3. I will say though, regardless of what strategy you employ, this is by far the most drawn out contract of the 5, and I think that I'm not alone in this sentiment. When it comes to the number of attempts, it took me 70 attempts to get my first clear on the main. Despite this number actually being lower than the other contracts that took me over 100, besides the joke that is Forfeit breath, that one was really easy. My frustration was at an all-time high with this one. I felt that the attempts were... Oh my god, that was 12 minutes. Glyphic Attenuation done. That means we have Radiant Oplate completed on the main. I didn't do a second KC of Forfeit breath because it was easy. But I didn't do a second KC of Glyphic Attenuation because I genuinely thought there was no more learning. And it just came down to execution to the best of my ability, and a bit of good luck. This is reflected in the KC it took on the Iron, as it took me another 31 contracts to get it on that account. Ooh, okay, there we go. First try on a new day. That is Radiant Oplate complete on the Iron Man. Here we are on both accounts. Got the full Oplate equipped on each account respectively. I actually have to go buy the full Oplate helmet on the main. Anyways, let's de-equip the Oplate And we're going to use the Purifying Sigil. It's going to cost 2,500 Aether Runes. I have to go craft those on the Iron Man here on Wait For It. But yeah, we're going to use 2,500. I guess we'll do it on the Iron first. Now let's move on over, stand next to our main here. There we go. That is full Oplate. Now before we equip it, let me swap the POV over. Over on the main, you can see I have the Oplate here as well, the Sigil. Now these Aether Runes, I simply just had to buy, not a problem. There we go. Now let's equip them at the same time. Radiant Oplate on both accounts, the main and the Iron Man. Now we have the helmet on, but honestly the Blorva helm goes with it in more situations. Here are the numbers broken down by contract and account. I've mentioned them throughout the video, but here it is together and in its entirety. While we look at this, I guess let me give my final thoughts on the grind and perhaps what I would have done differently. I think the grind overall ended up being more fun than I thought it would. I don't have much of an opinion on Divine Severance, and that could just be because it was the first contract I took on, so my perception may be a bit skewed on that. And despite the overall grind taking me less than a week, it seems like forever ago that I did the first contract. Bloody Blows and Sensory Clouding had levels of frustration, but in a good way. This is because despite all my deaths, I felt like I was constantly learning and improving. And when I finally broke through, it felt rewarding and satisfying. As for Forfeit Breath, at first thought, I feel like you compare it to Awaken Whisper, in the sense that it's the freebie of the grinds, but even Awaken Whisperer felt harder than Forfeit Breath relatively. I think I spoke enough on Glyphic attenuation. It was probably the one sore spot of the grind. As for what I would have done differently in hindsight, well, it's Glyphic attenuation. I probably would have tackled that contract first and taken the time to do more efficient methods to do that contract. I didn't really look into each individual contract until, well, it just came up, you know. I kind of just rolled the dice on which one I want to do first, and then just based on what I've heard from clanmates, Bloodied Blows and Sensory Clouding were probably the more difficult ones, so I chose to tackle those kind of early-ish and not leave them for last so that I could have a nice and easy path to Radiant Oplate near the finish line. But I was mistaken. Glyphic attenuation caused a lot of personal frustration for me. And obviously this is all opinion based. Some people may find certain contracts easy and others hard, whereas I find different ones to be the case.